So mollusks are the largest group of Lophotrochozoa and second most in diversity only to the arthropods. They have about 100,000 species and a whole bunch of different body shapes, but they all have a general similar anatomy. So these are all soft-bodied animals, but some of them secrete a calcium carbonate shell to protect their body. So they have inside of a shell the visceral mass. So the visceral mass is going to contain most of their body structures. We've got gills, a mouth, digestive tube, all the way to an anus. Now we're starting to see intestines and stomach. They have a feeding structure called a radula for scraping. You've got some ventral nerve cords down here, as well as a foot. And then over the visceral mass, there is a piece of tissue called the mantle. And then there's usually a cavity between the mantle and the shell, if there is a shell over this visceral mass. So there's 4 major groups. The first one is Polyplacophora, and that's down here with the chitons. And the chitons all look like this guy. We have Gastropoda. Gastro means stomach, pod means foot, so these literally mean stomach, foot. So that's going to be the slugs and snails. The bivalves, bi means 2, so these are going to be mollusks with 2 shells, and now these shells are left and right, unlike the brachiopods. Unlike the brachiopods. And then cephalopoda, so cephalo means head, and then pod means foot. So head, foot is going to be the octopus, squid, and such on. So we'll look at each of these. So these are chitons, the Polyplacophora. They have 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 dorsal plates, so that's the top. These are going to adhere to rocks and surfaces using their foot. So their foot works like a suction cup to keep them on, and then they use their radula to scrape algae off of rock surfaces. So this is a really nice micrograph image here of a radula that's used for scraping. The gastropods, so again, gastro means stomach, pod means foot. So these are going to be our snails and slugs. Most of these are marine, so like 3/4 of these are going to be sea slugs. They typically move slowly, so you can see there's this rippling motion of the foot, which is going to propel it. On land, this is very slow, and so a lot of terrestrial gastropods, like snails, will have a shell, and the shell helps protect them from injury, keeps them from drying out from dehydration, as well as to help protect them from predators. So if a snail sees a bird coming to eat it, instead of running away, it can pull up into its shell and roll away or hide and hopefully not get eaten. Most of these are herbivores, so they're again also going to have a radula, typically for scraping at plants or algae. They all have eyes at the tip of the tentacles for vision. And then the aquatic ones have gills for breathing in the water, and then terrestrial ones will typically breathe inside of their mantle cavity, inside of the shell, or through their skin rather than having actual lungs. So bivalve is going to be these groups of aquatic species that have 2 shells, and these are going to be things like clams, oysters, mussels, scallops. And the shell is divided into 2 halves and then drawn together with an adductor muscle. So if you think add means like to bring together, so adductor muscles are going to close their shell. And you can see that right here. They've got 1, 2 really big adductor muscles. So these are very strong for holding their shell closed. They are muscles, so if they are trying to hold their shell closed for too long, they will eventually tire out. Which is how starfish can eat bivalves. The radula is lost, so instead of using a scraping radula, they're typically going to filter feed. So they use their gills to filter oxygen as well as food out of the water. Most of these are sedentary, meaning that they're going to sit in one place. So, for example, mussels secure themselves to rocks with threads, but some of them have some mobility. Scallops can swim. What they do is they open and close their shell to squirt water out of this opening, and it propels them backwards along the ground. Scallops also have these little blue eye spots. So sometimes if you come close to a scallop, they'll see a dark shadow and then scoot away from you. Large clams can also use their foot, so they still have this foot that they can reach out and kind of move around with. And they're not going to move as efficiently as something like a snail, but they might be able to push themselves in a certain direction. The last group we have are the cephalopods. So these are going to be marine predators, and instead of a radula, they have a beak surrounded by tentacles. The tentacles are actually a modified portion of the foot, as well as something called the excurrent siphon. So X means out. So what they can do is they can draw water into their mantle and then squirt it out through their excurrent siphon to help propel them through the water very quickly. The shell is reduced, so squids actually do have a shell that's internal. The nautilus, you can see, does have a shell, but the octopus here has completely lost its shell and does not have any more hard parts besides its beak. They have a closed circulatory system, so now we're seeing bodies that are really large, and they're going to transport oxygen through blood vessels that go from the heart around in a loop all the way back to the heart. That's what closed means. It's not going to mix with any other fluid. They have really well-developed sense organs and a very complex brain. So octopus are extremely smart. They need husbandry and entertainment when they're in things like aquariums. An octopus might spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to open a complex puzzle that has food inside, and then learns the next time it's given the same puzzle, it can open it much faster. A squid, most of them are pretty small, less than 75 centimeters long. There are some species of really large squids. So the giant squid can get up to a max length of about 13 meters for females and 10 meters for males. And then there's an even larger squid called the colossal squid, which can reach up to about 14 meters in length. And the colossal squid has large hooks on the tentacles that can inflict lacerations, and they're typically deep ocean predators. And we know about these because they're found typically in the stomachs of things like sperm whales. Our last group here of Lophotrochozoa is the annelids. So Anna means annual, like rings, and Lida is small. So Annelid literally means little rings. And there's two main groups. So these are coelomates. They have a true coelom, body cavity surrounded by mesoderm. The Arantians, so the French word errant means to move. So these Arantians have these little parapodia, and that's these paddle-like ridges on each of their segments. And each segment is how they got their name, little rings, because they look like they have little rings that go around their body. So the Arantians are typically going to be mobile. Some of them swim, crawl, burrow. These are predators or grazers, and they have well-developed jaws and sensory systems, as well as a complete digestive system. Sedentarians is the other group, and these are less mobile. This comes from the Latin word sedere, which means to sit. When you're sedentary, you're sitting. So these are going to have things like tube worms. So you can see this is a tube worm, and it's got these large frilled gills that it pokes out for filter feeding. If you were to swim past this tube worm, it would be scared and it would go back into, it would pull its gills in into protective tubes. We also see leeches. So here's a leech. A leech is mostly freshwater parasite. So it's latched onto this finger here, and they eat blood. So most people are not aware that they have a leech attached to them because they create an anesthetic that prevents pain, as well as something called hirudin, which prevents coagulation. So they can fill up on blood and prevent the blood from clotting, and then prevent their host from even knowing they're there. Leeches, and we also have earthworms. So this is a really large earthworm here. Earthworms are going to live in the soil. They actually eat the dirt and they extract nutrients from it, and then their fecal castings, they cast back out the actual dirt, which will actually help improve the texture of soil. So they help to till and aerate soil. These are also hermaphrodites, and they cross-fertilize. So you still need two earthworms to mate, but what happens is they both fertilize each other. So the male reproductive system of both of them fertilizes the female reproductive system of the other worm.